Hi friends, welcome back. This is lesson 2 of our special project, the Tiffany window. I'm so glad you're back with me. Let's review what you're going to need for part 2, today's lesson, as we work on our Tiffany window. You need your pencil, a really good eraser, either a white one or a kneaded eraser. You should have some scrap paper, and you're going to need your original piece of Bristol board that you've already been doing your drawing on. You should have that handy. Mine's on my easel. And of course your flower that you have decided to use as your source of inspiration. Now I have a couple of choices up here. Maybe one of mine looks similar to yours, or maybe yours is entirely different. But we're still going to be doing some observing today, so have your flowers handy. Okay. We're doing a window pane in the style of Louis Comfort Tiffany. Now, he was one of the premier artists of a movement of art called Art Nouveau. And that was from the turn of the last century, starting at about 1875 and going to about 1935. In fact, you'll see a lot of amazing things that came out of that era of Art Nouveau, not just paintings, but a lot of decorative arts. That was probably the signature achievement of that movement, where art came into contact with the public and they didn't have to go to a museum to see it. The Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building in New York are examples of architecture that were done during the Art Nouveau movement. So Art Nouveau added a lot to architecture, to textiles, to decorative things like pots, sculpture, doors, and the lamps, of course, that Tiffany made. And so that was one of the great achievements. And Tiffany was excited about that. He had grown up surrounded by beautiful things, and that was because he grew up in a wealthy family. But he wanted everyone to be surrounded by beautiful things. And so he brought art from being something that was hung in a museum into the everyday home, decorative objects. So he became known for his windows and his lamps. And not just windows for churches, but windows in office buildings, windows in an everyday home. Now, he used nature as one of his primary inspirations, which is what we're doing today. We're using flowers to do this project. You should have already had your project mostly completed in terms of the drawing of your flower. But we're going to work on another piece of the drawing today, the negative space. That means the space that's around our primary object. Let me clarify by showing you one of Tiffany's windows, and you'll see what I mean. This is called Peacock Window. It is absolutely stunningly beautiful. And let's look at some of the elements in that window. Of course, there's the peacock himself, his neck and head, his main body, and his long tail. Now those are all comprised of very small pieces of colored glass. The other elements are the two columns that are holding up a portico covered in grapevines. You'll see there's a column to the left and a column to the right, and the portico is at the top. And that's balanced in the bottom. The peacock is sitting on a balustrade, and that's a very special type of railing that you would see in some beautiful architecture. And so that composition is very specific because it follows a rule of thumb called the rule of thirds. And you'll notice it's not just a peacock right in the middle of the composition, but there's other elements that add to that. The portico at the top is in the top third. The peacock himself is in the center third. The balustrade and the tail are in the bottom third. And the columns on the left and the right then divide the space in thirds vertically. So let's look at something so you can see it up close and personal. Now here is a copy of one of the other stained glass window projects. And if we were to do the rule of thirds, this is some tracing paper. I would make some lines here. Of course, I'm not going to draw lines on my finished work. But if you were to make imaginary lines, the idea of the rule of thirds is that you would divide any piece of artwork into thirds, both horizontally and vertically. So you wind up with 9 sections. The rule of thirds says that items of key interest will be where those lines intersect. And so here is where there's a bunch of stems that intersect. Along this line, there's a lot of leaves and flowers. Over here, there's something of interest in almost every section. Now, there's nothing down in this section here. The rule of thirds says that you don't put things in an X or in a T in the center, that you think of those 9 areas that you want something of visual interest in most of the 9 areas. The rule of thirds. Here's another Tiffany window that really helps show the rule of thirds. It's called Magnolia Window. It's a lovely piece of art. The subtle colors that Tiffany achieved in the glass are really incredible. But let's take a look and see if Tiffany used the rule of thirds. If we were to draw imaginary lines that divide this work into sections, in thirds vertically and in thirds horizontally, we can see key parts of Tiffany's composition are right at the intersection of the lines. The base of the upper part of the tree branches. See that upper third? And the horizon line at the base of the mountains. That's your lower third. And vertically, we have the edge of the tree on the left and then the tree on the right. So you can see Tiffany really used rule of thirds in this window. Now that doesn't mean it has to be that way for everything, but it is helpful to keep in mind when you're planning out your window. So go back and look at your window. Now this is the one that I did in lesson 1. If I were to look at the rule of thirds, are things of visual interest where the lines intersect? Well, kind of, yeah. This top third line, this is where the base of my 2 blooms are. I have a lot of leaf action going on at the line of this third. This stem is right about going down here. But supposing it wasn't, supposing all of my stuff was bunched in the center. This is an opportunity for you to go back to your drawing. Remember, you've been drawing lightly, so your lines are light, and you can take your eraser and you can change your composition. Now, why is that important? Well, before we add color, which is permanent, you can't change that once that's there, this is your chance as an artist to make your decisions. Is the composition balanced? Do I have items of interest at various points in my composition? Let's look at another Tiffany, and you'll really see what I mean. Now, when you're making a stained glass window, you can't just put glass pieces together. They have to be held together with something. So these dark lines that you see in a stained glass window are actually ropes of lead. Now, back in the time when Tiffany was making stained glass windows, the ropes of lead were very much like Play-Doh or silly putty, but it was very, very heavy. And the craftsman would take the rope of lead and form it around the piece of glass and press the other pieces of glass into it. And they would lay it on top and make a beautiful window. Well, Tiffany knew that those black lines that the lead would make were just as important in the composition as any other piece. But in order to keep the window rigid, especially a large window, he had to make sure he had enough of those lead lines to give it support so that the window would not fall apart. So he often would break up his composition into sections, and that's how this one is. This is a famous window by Tiffany called Parakeets and Goldfish Bowl. And you'll see it's a really beautiful arrangement. This beautiful set of branches with blooms on it, and a flock of parakeets has come, but hanging from the branch on a chain is a goldfish bowl. And it's hard to see the goldfish distinctly because they're swimming in water. But you'll notice Tiffany put a thing of interest, a focal point, in each of the sections. He divided this into 4 sections. This top section has the primary branch that's visible with the beautiful blooms. The middle section has your 3 parakeets with their wings open. The third section, of course, has the goldfish bowl with this beautiful glass. And the bottom section has another full branch and 2 young parakeets. So his composition is very balanced. And balance is an important principle of art. Now, sometimes you achieve balance by symmetrical balance. And if you were with me in Art Class 1, you remember when we talked about symmetry, where 2 halves are exactly the same. That's a way to achieve balance. You know that if you've been studying in school. If you have a scale and two things on both sides of the scale weigh the same, then the scale is balanced. But sometimes it could be something like a brick, which is very heavy, but instead of another brick, it's a lot of little things, a pile of gravel. And they still balance each other even though they're not the same. This is a lot of little with one big thing. And that was something Tiffany kept in mind when he was doing his windows. Some of his ornate windows, like the peacock, had a lot of little pieces of colored glass. So then he would balance that other places in the composition with large pieces of solid glass, like the column, still achieving balance. So now we want to continue on with our drawing. And so you should have most of your stem and leaves and flowers done. But what if you're having trouble with your flowers? They're not quite like mine. Remember, I decided to work on the blooms that were long with lots of little tiny petals at the very ends. Supposing you have flowers like, say, this one that just has 4 giant petals with some stuff sticking up in the center, or this one that has 8 petals with a button center. Well, let's do that here. Here's a drawing I started, but I did not put the flowers in. Now, let me try and darken up my lines a little bit so you can see them. You're going to keep your lines light so you can erase. It doesn't matter if they're dark when you're finished, but for right now, you want to make sure that they're nice and light. So you can see I have a leaf shape here that is a organic shape, meaning it's not very geometric, it's kind of free form. Every leaf is a little different. So observe your leaf. But supposing you're still working on the blooms. Well, what if you wanted to do a button flower like this one, but you wanted to show one of the blooms from the side? If you're looking down at the button center, you would see the full button. But if you're doing it from the side, you wouldn't see it. What you would see is some of the green that is attached to the underside of the bloom. And that's like a little cup. So over here on this stem, I'm just going to draw a little cup that has a few frayed edges. Oh my, kind of looks like a jellyfish upside down, doesn't it? So now for our petals. I'm not going to see all 8. Remember, we always draw what we see, not what we know. So there might be 8 petals and you know that, but if you can't see them, only draw what you can see. So maybe I only see 5. They all are facing up. So I start with the one on the edge, and since I'm seeing it from the side, it'll be thinner. Let's do the one on the other end, and that will define the area with which we're going to do our flower. I'm drawing a little darker. You draw lightly. Looks like I have room for maybe 3 petals in there. So I see part of this one and part of this one, but I would probably see the fuller petal. And so it's a larger shape that frills up at the top, comes back down to our cup. Let's do another one right here. And maybe peeking through this gap, I see just a little bit. And there is the flower from the side. Now what if I want to show the button flower? You don't put the button at the end of the stem because the button is in the center of the flower. So leave a gap. This is the end of my stem. Leave a gap and draw the button. And now draw a petal down towards the stem with a frilled edge. And that will show me where I'm going to put my petal. And I'm going off the page, which is okay, friends. Your composition can go off your page. Tiffany did it as well. When you're doing an 8-petaled flower, you draw the first 4, and then you come back, and in the gaps, you do the last 4. And it's not a straight line, kind of frayed and frilly, like that. Now, if you have a different kind of flower, you're going to have to spend some time observing it and practice. There's nothing that says you have to do your final drawing right away. Use the scrap paper you have to practice making shapes. And when you get the shape that's most closely suggests the flower you have, then you finish it on your drawing. Okay, if you need to take some time now to do your flowers, stop the DVD and then come back because I'll be here. We're ready to move on to the next step. So now that we have our basic composition with our flower and stems, let me go back to mine. Now we're ready to break up the negative space. Now, if you were to look at, say, our parakeets and goldfish, all of the very small pieces of glass were the subject matter. The branch with the blooms, the parakeets, the goldfish bowl. But you'll also see that there's lead lines that are breaking up the background. Well, one, it was important structurally to keep the window nice and rigid. You had to break up the space. And it was very important to Tiffany that he experiment with how to color glass and to make it really interesting. So they were unique pieces of glass that were fitted in, kind of like a puzzle. So these are all broken up. The background is not one big piece, but broken up into many pieces. And that added to the appeal of the stained glass window. If you look at the lamps, it's the same thing. So now we're going to break up our negative space. Now what we want to do with this in order to add interest, my friends, is have contrast. And contrast means the opposite. So if I have long, slender leaves, I don't think I really want to have long, slender shapes behind it. I want to kind of break it up. And if I were using the other drawing where I have a lot of curvy lines for my leaves, I want more geometric type shapes that are more angular for my background. That's contrast. So to start, here's a couple of rules I want you to remember. Don't make the background shapes very small. They should not be as small as these shapes. They're going to be larger. But don't make them any bigger than your fist, okay? Where to start? Well, just start. Find your main drawing and just draw a line out to the edge. I can kind of see a nice shape starting right there, so I'm going to go from the tip of this flower stem out to that edge. What I'm doing is I'm simply breaking up the negative space. And that's about the size I want to go. About the size of my fist, no smaller. I think I'll change direction now and go this way. This now has created another background shape. It's a closed off shape because of this line that I've drawn here. So you're going to keep going and you're going to break up the space. Change the direction. Some might be diagonal. Some might be slightly curvy. Don't make them too intricate. It should be a fairly simple line. And if it seems natural, like from the end of this leaf right over to there, now I've created that shape. So do you have it? You're going to spend some time breaking up the negative space. And that's going to add a lot to your composition because this is what we're going to use for our lead lines. Of course, we're not going to be using lead. We're going to be using a black marker. But it was an important element of the composition. Okay, I have all about the same size. That's the other rule. Try and keep your background shapes about the same size. There's a lot of space down here, so I can break this up in a unique way. There's a space that just naturally is right in here, so I'll bring that leaf over. I think I want to head in that direction now. Maybe connect it that way. You keep working. You do the same thing on your drawing. Break up the negative space. Now, Tiffany loved experimenting with how he put the glass together. In fact, if you look at some of his windows from his earlier time, they look a little different from the later windows because he kept on growing and changing as an artist, getting more and more creative with how he did his windows. I think I'll break up that shape like that. Is it getting harder to see our composition? It probably would be. We have a lot of shapes going on here. It will totally pop when we add color. So I think I'll go this way and perhaps one more shape there. Okay, So now I've broken up my negative space. We've finished our flower composition, but we still have a lot more to do to get to our window pane in the style of Louis Comfort Tiffany. Now, when you step back and look at it, do you like the shapes? Did you start to get too dark with your pencil because you got excited putting in those lines? What if you don't like it? What if you don't like how the flower buds look right now? Well, then we can always go to our eraser. An eraser is a really important tool in art. You've heard me say that before. But you know what the eraser reminds me of? Second chances. And our God is a God of second chances. So when you mess up, He gives you chance after chance. And He's done it so many times in the Bible. In fact, the Bible is filled with characters and heroes that have gotten a lot of second chances from God. What about Saul of Tarsus? Do you know that story? Saul did not like those who followed Jesus. He was a Pharisee also, and he was very zealous for God, but he was all about the rules. And he did not like this Jesus who came and preached what he felt was something that was different than what he'd been taught all his life. He could not see. And so God absolutely gave Saul a second chance for a really powerful experience. And so he went on after getting that second chance where his eyes, after being blinded, were free to see who Jesus really was. Now he was preaching all over the place as Paul and sharing the good news. Let me read you a great verse that talks about second chances. It's in John 5. John 5:24 says, this is Jesus talking. Very truly, I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. Isn't that a great verse? That says that when we die, if we really believe in who Jesus is and accept that gift, we're not going to be judged on all the bad things that we've done. We have a second chance and we can live with God forever in heaven. Oh, I hope you've grasped that second chance. I hope you've heard the word and believed. And this is where you find it, my friends, in God's word, the Bible. And that's why I love the eraser so much, because it's a constant reminder that mistakes can be wiped away and we get a second chance when we believe in His word. So use your eraser if you have to change a line. Look very carefully, is your composition balanced? Are all of your negative shapes that you've put in about the same size? You don't want any that are too small that will change things in their balance. I think it's looking pretty good. My lines are varying in directions. My shapes are not too, my negative space shapes are not too similar to my leaf shapes. So I think we're good to go. Now, if you're not finished, after the DVD ends, you can finish completing your negative space by breaking it up into those sizes. And remember the rules. Nothing too small, no bigger than your fist. Vary the direction of your lines. Keep your negative space shapes about the same size. And then we'll be ready to move on to the next part of our Tiffany window in Lesson 3. Thanks, friends. I'm so glad you joined me. I'll see you next time.